Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and this is Chasing Legends. Welcome back. This is Chasing Legends once again. Please go down below, hit our subscribe button, the notification bells to find out when we're having more videos and other content. Go over to the About section, check out our website, legendthesuperstitionmountains.com. Got a lot of cool stuff, the shirts, the coffee cups, and various other things, so go check the stuff out. Getting on from there, I'd like to mention that here coming up in March, we'll be having the next batch of episodes, the Legend of the Superstition Mountain episodes. So there's a bit of a trailer out there and kind of tease to kind of start building it up. And it's a little difficult because a lot of it I don't remember because it's been a couple of years. That's actually, we were filming that during when COVID hit. And then everything got kind of scrambled and changed around. That's when we began Chasing Legends. So here we are, still doing Chasing Legends. We finally pulled some of that footage together and we've been back in the mountains, but we always want to stay ahead of ourselves. And even though that is way behind for the next particular some of the trips we're making, we're kind of taking the approach of getting some stuff in the can before we go move forward to release those. But there should be 12 new episodes coming up in March, which will extend us up into the summer. And then hopefully with what we have this year, we'll be getting into the next fall and we'll be doing some more episodes still again. The delays, well, obviously COVID and a lot of other things have transpired and happened. Frank had a few problems, a few bumps in the road, catching colds during the winter, plus the COVID threat. Woody as well had a lot of health issues and so forth. And then just recently we had everything planned out this spring, and then Trevor had some surgery. So one of the reasons people haven't seen things quite as much and Trevor's not been as available is he had to go through some surgery. Everything's good. He's recovering well, but there's a recovery process of which he can't really go out. Can't be toting equipment and doing a lot of that. So we're not going to send you back to the iPhone days and all that. We just decided we got what we got. And then here, hopefully in the next month or two, we'll be back out. But he is recovering well. It's just a kind of a difficult thing juggling with all those real life circumstances that happen. So thanks for joining us. And this week, what we'll be talking about is something Trevor and I talked about this, and I wanted to go out and do some of these stories in the actual places. So I thought, man, it would be cool to stand in the particular spot and do the story from there. And we agreed on that. We planned several trips, and that's gotten a little bit delayed, but we will be doing some of that because I thought some of the Chasing Legend stuff, or that wouldn't be legend episode type stuff, that would be cool to revisit a few things. So, but this is a particular one. I don't really feel comfortable doing it in the location, the site, because, and the reasons are obvious. There are some sites, some places that we really don't want to put too much information or too much out there. There is a reasonable amount of information, but, and I'll explain later why we feel kind of pretty good about the security of the site, but you just don't want people out there and don't want people messing around. Even people who think they are professionals. It just doesn't work that way. There are some sites that just, it's better to preserve them, let them be, and so forth. And it just, you feel great that if you know where the site is, or if you've been to the site, people want to see photographs, but you want to tell the story of it because people have asked about this particular story and said, hey, would you guys ever do one about this? And I thought, fine, but I wanted to find the particular way and route. We planned a trip out there into that area. And then I thought I just didn't want to do it out there on location for what the reason. Now this story goes back to a gentleman named Joe Modoc, and he's out of Mesa. He's a prospector. He's been prospecting for most of his life. He's back in the Superstitions, and he comes back into town from the Superstitions into Mesa, and he says what he has are diamonds. And Joe Modoc goes in and he tells the newspapers and all, and he's going to resupply and outfit himself, but he's showing them all these crystallized diamonds, some that are about the size of a thumbnail. And it becomes actually kind of a big newspaper story. He claims he found this back in the eastern Superstition Mountains, and he says all along he knew it wasn't the Lost Dutchman Mine. There would be rich diamond mines, and probably because of the calderas and the volcano, the super volcanoes that were there at one time. So he believes that he has found diamonds. I know Tom Collenborn, and I would say most of us would particularly think he was conning people because he was a prospector. He also claimed that he had mined and prospected for diamonds in Africa. But if he knew what a diamond looked like, he knew the difference. These were calcite quartz crystals. So Modoc was trying to pull one over everybody, and there are plenty of conmen in the mountains, plenty of conmen over time. There are conmen today, and people that will try to sell you a raw, bad bill of goods. But Modoc did this, but the thing is, he had found a site that was actually quite well known. Now, there's a gentleman back in the 1890s in that area, and we're going to generally say it's Tony Cabin, Haunted Canyon for general reference. And his name was Peter Moraga. And Peter Moraga had found this place back probably during that period of time. Now, there is discrepancies because Moraga talks about such a place, but there are several different caves that have this crystal type, the stalagmites and stalactites and all that stuff in them. So it might have been a different one. I believe Tom Collenborn felt Moraga's cave would actually have been a different one. And the story kind of isn't like a huge story, except that a gentleman by name Jose Perez came out of the mountains and he thought he had found something, but he thought it was the Lost Dutchman Mine. He came out and he thought he had found quite a bit out there. And I believe this is around 1916 to 1920. And Jose Perez was in the papers a little about his find and so forth. And a lot of people kind of like generally go off those three stories. They get them confused because the Moraga story, the Perez story, and the Modoc story, very similar. You have a Joe and a Jose, Modoc and Moraga. It can get very confusing. It's three separate gentlemen. Sometimes there's a lot of superficial stuff added to the stories. What it is it's up in the limestone area, and there's a cave. It goes back, I think they've explored it roughly about 1,200 feet. There were some other people in the early 70s went back about 1,200 feet through several sections of it. It has a lot of different areas and tubes that go off of it. But there is a place called the Grand Chamber, and the Grand Chamber is a large hall of these stalactites and stalagmites and all this stuff. It's about, and that Grand Chamber is probably about, I think it's 300 to 500 feet from the entrance. There is something spray painted, I think someone let me know, now on the right side of the entrance once you get in. But the funny thing about that is Tom Collenborn never mentioned that. So there are several caves that are similar. So the one that Tom talks of in the Perez, and the one that's generally known as the Cave of 1,000 Eyes, very, very small entrance. Tom said the last time, and this would have been probably about 12 to 15 years ago, Tom made a visit, said the entrance was almost closed just naturally. There wasn't very much of an entrance, and he'd taken pieces of rock and stuff, and he'd left some very small holes where the bats could get out, but it was almost indistinguishable of just being like some just loose rocks on some ground. And there's a grove of trees that cover the area too. Now there's other people say, oh, I found it. You can see it. It's about 50 feet from the trail. Tom always said you will not find it from the trail or the wash or any place like that. He said basically, even when he's been there and he had his GPS, which he felt was accurate within 10 feet. Sometimes it took him a few times to look around to figure out where it was and where he'd actually buried it. So a very difficult place. I know Tom had taken Sharon there, his wife. I don't, like I said, I think the last trip he would have made was about 12, 15 years ago. And Tom never mentioned some. Tom's description was as you go in, about 500-600 feet in, there's a piece of string or rope where someone had gone in and laid that out to follow which way to get to the main chamber. That was there. And Tom also said there was a bear skeleton. And he couldn't determine anything of the skeleton, but he said there was plenty of, before he had sealed it up, that a lot of large animals, a lot of animals had made a habitat in there. So that was always made it particularly dangerous. Now, Tom didn't just discover it. An old cowhand, go unmentioned, had taken Tom out there and showed it to him. and took Tom out and kind of gave him the thing. And Tom had a lot of photographs of it. He said they weren't very good photographs. And I was fortunate to see a couple of them, and he was right. They weren't done very well because of the lighting in there. You're just not going to get a great picture. And he talked about it. He was very close to the vest about it. We all were always listening for little hints or little things where we might think it might have been. And I think most of us after a time kind of felt like, well, it's just better to let it be. Because Tom's greatest fear and worry was someone go in there and start breaking stuff off. He said where Joe Modoc had gone in, you could see where he'd broken off some of the stalagmites and broke them to do his diamond story. So he said from the last time he was there, which I said again was 12 to 15 years ago, Tom said there was nothing had changed. It didn't look like anybody had been in there. Nothing had been disturbed. Since the last time he'd been in. He just went in to check it out, make sure everything was fine. Nobody had just rediscovered it. And then he just put it carefully back the way he did. And I do not think he made another trip out after that. Because the worry is always if someone knew he was going out, they might, knowing the particular area, decide that. Now his last trip, I believe they walked in. I know most of the time a lot of people go into that area, would ride in from the other end. So... But, you know, it's an interesting story. And it's an interesting story because it's obviously a true story of a very real place. It'd be a wonderful place to be able to see, physically see, and so forth. But then the problems occur, much like the Rogers Canyon ruins, where the roofs caved in a few spots because people just have to climb up there. And then the graffiti from the turn of the century and so forth that all of us think was so cool, people will continue to add their names, do a number of ridiculous things and deface the place. And so we end up more and more with a problem. So places like the Cave of the Thousand Eyes, nobody wants to talk about it too much. A few people there, like I said, there was a time Randy Wright and I were interested in finding the location. But then we kind of realized Tom was telling us plenty of other things and other places to go. He would talk about the site. He'd tell you a little of the history and when he first went in, which he said it was very dangerous. He said he was young and kind of a little more full of himself when he went in there, and he crawled in because it's very narrow to get in. But he said later, you know, it was kind of like there's an enormity of responsibility on that you don't want anything to come cause any damage, vandalism, and the commercialism of that, which is always a problem in those sorts of things. But it's a great story. But in the end, the story does get a bit confusing because Modoc's story has a few little elements that are just made up BS. But in each case, it appears they found those caves, and there are several of them. So if you find one, unfortunately, the one person that could always verify whether you had the right one would have been Tom, and he's no longer with us. I think you could go by some of his description and some of the interior. The bear skeleton would obviously still be there. So, and Tom was not known to, you know, on something like that, he was generally just straight up and clear. So, very cool site. I haven't heard, you know, there's always this guy who's going to say, oh yeah, I know where it's at, but, you know, I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm not always sure they find them. So that's it. That's kind of the gist of the Cave of the Thousand Eyes. Like I said, Tom was shown that. I don't think he had heard of the story before that. Someone else had showed it to him. Or maybe he heard the Perez story or something, and he asked someone about it, and they said they kind of knew of it. The rancher knew. He knew where it was and took him back. Now, the old cowboy did not go in. He told Tom, you can go in, but he stayed out because he had no interest in going in there. So there we go. There's the story of the Cave of the Thousand Eyes. It's not a huge elaborate story, and I don't want to get into the superficial BS that some of people attach to it and so forth. It's a calcite crystal cave up in the limestone deposits, and it's a very, very cool and special place. And I hope if someone would find it, that they would restore everything just like Tom said, so the bats can get in and out, but it would keep larger predators or animals out, and definitely human beings. And no one ever would expose it or put up the GPS coordinates and so forth. There are a couple people probably know the location, and I won't say anything generally whether I would know or not. Generally, most of these types of sites, what we know, we try to kind of keep distance And then I believe there's always someone to pass down. They always try to find someone to pass the GPS or the location to so the next person can find it, which is not always successful because there's a few things that were passed to me. And I don't know if anyone has seen those things. And I try to get back, and I was never able to locate certain specific things. Not saying it was the Cave of the Bronze Cross, but even with the directions and everything, and I was like, I know it's probably there. I don't think they would have. And definitely the frustration of how come you didn't find it the first time. So there are several sites, and those are just passed along so that someone can always kind of keep an eye on things and make sure they're preserved or report if there is some sort of vandalism or something happened to one of those areas, which is part of the preservation of the mountains and the history and so forth. And if I ever got back and I ever took it upon myself, which I think if I had a bit of time with what I know, and I decided it would be kind of cool to get pictures or a video of the interior of that. It would be nice to see it documented, but at the same time, that sometimes creates even more of an impulse by the general public to want to go find that site. And like I said, there's no gold, there's no silver. It's just someone go in there and probably destroy it. And even just the humidity changes or the changes in ourselves. And it's not particularly going to be a pleasant place. There's going to be plenty of flies. There's some dead carcass animals, which probably wouldn't smell at this point, but there'd be a lot of flies back in there because of the bats and a lot of guano. And trust me and you, I've had enough of guano for a time now still. So there you go. Great story. Great little thing. It's not an expanded story, and that's probably the reason. I do believe Tom did an article or two briefly on it, but there's reason there's not chapters of a story is there just isn't a lot to unbag on that. But if you ever find a site such as that, sometimes it's best to keep it to yourself and just share it with a few intimate people, and always try to leave things behind. There was a small shallow cave up in a particular area by a water hole up in the Superstitions, and it was kind of high up, and I had just poked around and I found this. It was a very cool site, and then I found out someone else had found it, but nobody really knew of it, and it had some old arrows. It looked like someone had been chipping away trying to make arrowheads, and they were making arrows, and they were hunting down by that at Waterhole. And it was kind of very cool because it was like there in time, and I didn't touch anything because I realized it could be so old that everything would start to fall apart. But from what I know, and just no one's been up there, it's a site where I generally don't approach it. If I'm in the area, I kind of look and see, and I can tell if nothing's been disturbed that no one's even went that route or anything. And it's kind of cool because it should be preserved in its time and in its place. And we don't really want particular people to go up there and ruin that. If it stood the test of time for the last 100 or 200 or 500 years, why not let it just continue and remain? So there you go, the memoirs of those types of things. I hope you enjoyed this story, as short and sweet as it is. We will be getting out in the mountains, and we have a few places in particular we will do on-site stuff like this. And I hope everybody enjoys it. I hope everybody's looking forward to the episode stuff. I certainly am, because I don't even remember some of what we did. It's been so long. I'm sure Frank's long forgotten some of it. But we hope you're enjoying with us. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for watching all the time. I hope everybody's enjoying the winter, getting out, stretching their legs, enjoying some time out here. The Lost Dutchman Parade and all the festivities will be coming up here shortly. And I hope everybody enjoys that with the parades and the rodeo and everything. Get on out and support everybody, Goldfield Ghost Town, Tortilla Flat, the museum, and everybody out there, and put in a good word that, hey, you know, it's great. And learn a bit about the history, because there's a lot of good books, a lot of great information to pull up, okay? So that being said and done, we're done here and good for another week. And until the next time, remember, I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.